we've seen this a few different times, the way that Greek values, Greek ideas get uploaded into Roman culture and translated into Roman culture, and in that translation get transformed in different ways. Uh, as soon as people start talking about a tradition, uh, that tradition is no longer, as it were, living, right, but is complete and is therefore an object for interpretation. Traditions, insofar as they can be talked about, are always understood through some kind of interpretation, right? And those interpretations are almost always going to be politicized in some way, right? The anxiety about the Western tradition in political discourse today is about anxiety over the, right, in particular, demographic shifts that are taking place in the United States, and the desire to hold on to a certain kind of political form and to keep political power in certain hands. Tradition gets interpreted and is then used as a tool to defend the political status quo in some ways. And this certainly happened in ancient Rome also, where the influx of Greek ideas, the adoption of the Greek tradition, then brought into light the Roman tradition and produced anxiety about Roman values, Roman traditions, and created a kind of reactionary attitude within Rome against this influx of Greek ideas. Second example that Arendt gives, where the idea of tradition becomes important and people start thinking about tradition, is in the Renaissance, when after the medieval period there was this rebirth of ideas that began in Rome, and suddenly in Europe, in Italy, in France, and elsewhere, people became concerned with the Roman tradition and started interpreting the Roman tradition and appropriating and borrowing from that tradition, right? And that Renaissance, the adoption of the Roman tradition, is again a moment where the status quo of the Middle Ages becomes questioned and is overturned in some sense, in many senses. And so Arendt's thought here is that tradition becomes important when one tradition is coming to an end, when there is a bouleversement, a upheaval in the political world, and tradition is used both as a way of fighting to hold on to the status quo, established power, established values, as a tool of conservative politics, and then also as a way to bring in other traditions to counterpose the establishment and as a tool of undermining that same establishment power. So our own concern with tradition today is, for Arendt, evidence that we are going through political unrest, which is certainly obvious. Um, Now, just one more word about this, and this is tangential, but many of these people who are defending the Western tradition will say that Marx is not part of that tradition, the tradition of Western political philosophy. And naturally, they would want to exclude Marx because Marx, as Arendt is arguing here, calls an end to that tradition. But this is preposterous. Marx is a German philosopher. He is using ideas that were part of the political, philosophical landscape throughout the 18th and 19th centuries in Germany and throughout Europe. He is through and through a European Western philosopher, part of that tradition. So the idea that Marx is not part of the Western tradition is patently foolish and nonsensical. And it's interesting to think that as a part of that tradition, we might hazard some sort of proposition that traditions bring themselves to an end. We could think about Nietzsche, who argues that the end of the tradition of Christian theology is contained in its very beginning, right? That because Christian theology places truth, goodness, and all power outside of this realm in some otherworldly realm, that Christian tradition was from its inception based in nihilism, in the nothingness, the non-existence of this otherworldly realm, and that therefore contained in the beginning of that tradition was its end. And Nietzsche, by pointing out this original nihilism within Christianity, brings that tradition to an end. And Marx, I think Arendt would say, does something similar by pointing out that there are these contradictions, these oversights and flaws in the foundation of the Western political tradition in Aristotle and Plato themselves, and that Marx merely highlights, exposes these contradictions and flaws, and that so, in so doing, he calls an end to this tradition that is contained within the tradition itself. So, still on page 1, Arendt says, the end of this tradition came with Marx's declaration that philosophy and its truth are located not outside the affairs of men and their common world, but precisely in them, and can be realized only in the sphere of living together, which he calls society, through the emergence of socialized men. So just like Nietzsche, right, what Marx is doing to reverse this tradition is, again, to deny this otherworldly realm, the realm of eternal things, of sort of divine contemplation, and to locate the real realm of politics in the realm of the affairs of men and the common world, right? In the sphere in which we live together in society, right? So rather than, as Plato would have it, uh, sort of meditate on the highest forms and organize society around those highest forms rather than leave society, as Arendt continually says, rather than leave society in order to contemplate society and then return to society so as to organize society based on this thinking that happens outside of society. Marx proposes that we need to stay within society, analyze society itself, understand society through society, and without ever leaving or stepping away to deal with this world and to try to fix the problems with politics based on an analysis of our common lived world. And as Arendt will say in just a moment, it's Marx, and I would add Nietzsche also, who, in saying that our philosophy needs to be based in this world and not some other world. In this claim, it's Marx and Nietzsche who give rise to what we call now the social sciences. We think of figures like Emil Durkheim or Malinowski, some of the first sociologists, as being the sort of quote unquote, again, an unhelpful patriarchal term, but the fathers of sociology. But it's really Marx and I'd say Nietzsche who give fullest philosophical voice to why the social sciences are, in some sense, the future of philosophy, why philosophy needs to become, in some way, social science to remain within this realm. And Nietzsche and Marx mean that in very different ways, but both of them are important to the rise of sociology, anthropology, political science as we think of it today, and all of those social sciences. So, like Nietzsche, Marx wants to move away from the realm of ideas and otherworldly realms, where politics is justified by divine principles or pure reason, and stay in the immediate, immanent realm, the realm of society where things happen, the realm of action, not ideals. And so this means that, somewhat like Nietzsche, but more so, Marx is a materialist. And materialism here means, in one sense, simply a rejection of